is 2:30 in the morning on the 25th of October 1944 in the Formosa Strait. USS Tang is on the surface 900 yards from several crippled transports. In 2 nights, she has torn through 2 convoys and behind her ships are burning along the China coast. She has 2 torpedoes left, both in the bow tubes. Commander Richard O'Kane fires the 23rd torpedo and it runs straight. Then he fires the 24th and his last. What that torpedo does in the next 20 seconds will end one of the most successful patrols in the history of the American submarine force. By the late Pacific War, American submarines had hunted Japan's supply lines for years. By 1944, they were strangling the empire's economy, sinking the tankers and freighters that carried its oil, its ore, and its troops. It was lethal work. Across the war, they sank close to 5 million tons of Japanese shipping, and 52 of the boats and more than 3,500 of their crews never came back. By the autumn of 1944, the campaign had a sharper aim. American forces were driving toward the Philippines and the submarines were sent to cut the convoys feeding Japanese reinforcements to the islands. The narrow channels of the East China Sea and the Formosa Strait between Formosa and the China coast were the choke points they were ordered to close. They were also among the most dangerous waters a submarine could enter, hemmed by minefields and so shallow that a boat had little room to dive. The boat that carried this fight furthest was Tang, a Vallejo-class fleet submarine built at the Mare Island Navy Yard in California and launched in August 1943. She displaced 1,500 tons on the surface, and her 4 diesel engines drove generators and fed electric motors that could push her to just over 20 knots on the surface, while her batteries gave her less than 9 knots submerged. She carried 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 in the bow and 4 in the stern, and a load of 24 torpedoes and a 5-inch or 25 caliber deck gun for surface fighting. Her builders rated her safe to dive to roughly 400 feet or 120 meters, though in action she dived deeper than 600 feet or 185 meters. Her commander was Richard O'Kane, a 1934 graduate of the Naval Academy. O'Kane had served as an executive officer of the submarine Wahoo before taking Tang as his own command when she was commissioned in October. Under Dudley Mush Morton, one of the most aggressive submarine commanders in the Pacific, O'Kane had learned close-range attack from inside the action itself, making periscope observations and firing torpedoes while Morton conned Wahoo into position. Now the decisions were his alone. Tang was still a new boat with 87 men in his charge, and under him she built a record in months that other boats needed years to approach. She reached Pearl Harbor in January 1944 and sailed that month for the Carolina and Mariana Islands. Across 10 days in February, she sank the freighters Joten Maru and Yamashimo Maru, each near 6,800 tons, along with the Fukuyama Maru, Ekisen Maru and Choko Maru, firing all 24 of her torpedoes for 16 hits before turning back to rearm. A second patrol, beginning in March, carried her through the approaches to Palau and toward Truk without a target she could reach. Those waters held a danger that had nothing to do with the enemy. The worst torpedo defects of the early submarine war had been fought down, but one rare failure remained. A fish could lose its course, swing into a circle, and come back toward the boat that launched it. The electric Mark 18 ran without a visible wake, making it harder for the lookout to follow in darkness, and O'Kane later believed that the lack of an effective anti-circular safeguard left submarines exposed when firing from the surface. That March, in the same broad Palau area Tang was working, another American fleet submarine, USS Tullabee, was destroyed by one of her own torpedoes on a circular run. Of a crew of 80, only 1 man lived. Then Tang was ordered to lifeguard station off Truk, holding on the surface beneath the American carrier strikes to recover aircrew shot down over the atoll. She pulled 22 downed flyers from the sea. It was the most any submarine had rescued, on a single patrol. She carried them to Hawaii, crammed into a boat built for 87, and for the rescue, every man aboard Tang received the Navy Air Medal, a decoration submariners almost never wore. In June, Tang went on a next patrol in the East China Sea and the Yellow Sea, and there she made the highest scoring American submarine patrol of the war by number of ships credited. In the Koshiki Strait southwest of Nagasaki, she drove into a convoy of 6 large ships, screened by 16 escorts, and sank 4 of them. One was the transport Tamahoko Maru, carrying 772 Allied prisoners of war and some 500 Japanese soldiers. She sank in under 2 minutes, and 560 of the prisoners died aboard her. Days later, Tang put a single torpedo into the transport Nikki Maru, which went down with some 3,200 Japanese soldiers. By the time she had run out of torpedoes and turned for home, Tang had sunk 10 ships for 39,160 tons. Her 4th patrol through the late summer took her into Japanese home waters off Honshu. She sank the cargo ship Tsukushi Maru and the freighter Rokumaru, which blew apart when the torpedo struck her boilers, and turned a deck gun on the smaller craft she found before turning to Pearl Harbor again. On September 24th, Tang departed for her 5th patrol. She fueled at Midway and sailed on the 27th for the Formosa Strait, the artery carrying Japanese reinforcements towards the Philippines as the American offensive opened. O'Kane was offered a choice: run down with a coordinated group of 3 other boats or go alone. He decided to go alone. The strait was some of the shallowest water in the Pacific, 200 feet or less, where depth charge bursting beneath a boat could throw her to the surface and leave her with nowhere to hide. Tang reached her station and began to hunt. For a week and a half she held the bottleneck, surfacing by night, watching her radar for the first convoy to come down the coast. The first contact came in the night of October 10th. 2 heavily laden freighters crossed Tang's track, and she sank them both in the dark before slipping away. Then the hunting slackened. For 12 days, she searched empty waters, working the shipping routes O'Kane had marked on his chart, until on the night of October 23rd, the radar found what she had waited for. A convoy was coming down the coast. In the darkness, O'Kane identified tankers, transports, freighters, and a screen of escorts. He chose to attack on the surface from inside the formation. Tang slipped through the escort screen and close to point-blank range among the merchant ships. From the middle of the convoy, she opened fire on the nearest ships. 2 torpedoes struck under the stack and engine room of the first ship. 1 burst into the stern of the second, and 2 more exploded under the third. The hits came before the last torpedo had cleared the tube, and the targets began to burn and settle. Post-war records later credited the ships as small freighters, probably carrying aviation gasoline, which helps explain why O'Kane had taken them for tankers in the darkness. As Tang lined up a tanker crossing her stern, a transport turned out of the column to ram her as well. The tanker came around to do the same. Caught between the two, with no room to dive, O'Kane held course until the last moment, then threw the rudder hard over and dove Tang clear. Both ships charged on into the water she had just left and collided. Their hulls overlapped. Tang fired 4 torpedoes from her stern tubes and down their length. The tanker went down by the bow and the transport hung at a 30-degree angle. With the escorts closing on her port bow and port beam and the destroyer closing on her port quarter, Tang rang up full speed and ran for open water. When she was 6,000 yards, roughly 5,500 meters off, another explosion tore through the night and the transport's bow went under. Through the next day, she held at periscope depth. At dark on October 24th, she surfaced and ran toward Turnabout Island, and her radar filled with so many contacts the screen was almost useless. It was a second convoy larger than the first, with tankers carrying aircraft on their decks and transports stacked with crated planes on their bows and sterns. As Tang tracked it along the coast, the escort's commander grew suspicious and he swept the water with a searchlight, lighting up his own ships. O'Kane picked out a large 3-deck transport, a smaller transport behind it, and a tanker, with their ranges roughly between 900 and 1400 yards, and he fired 2 torpedoes at each. Then he swung Tang along the convoy and fired his stern tubes at another transport. The convoy was awake now and firing back. Guns flashed along the line, tracer rounds reached across the water, and Tang went full speed to break clear. Astern, her torpedoes began to strike home. The tanker blew apart, a hit rocked the transport beside it, then a destroyer swung around that transport stern and charged the submarine, and seconds later it exploded too, caught either by one of Tang's own torpedoes or by the fire of the escorts closing in on her beam. When the flames died down, one transport still lay in sight, dead in the water. The rest of the convoy scattered into the darkness. Tang pulled clear, rechecked the last 2 torpedoes, both loaded in the bow tubes, and turned back to finish the cripple. At about 2:30, she was within 900 yards of the transport. She fired a 23rd torpedo, and it ran hot, straight and normal to the target. Then she fired the 24th and last torpedo. It left the tube, broached, and curved hard to the left into a circular run, its phosphorescent trail marking the turn back toward the boat that had launched it. O'Kane called for emergency speed and tried to clear the turning circle, but he could not. About 20 seconds after firing, the torpedo struck Tang on the port side, abreast the after torpedo room. The explosion was violent. Men as far forward as the control room were thrown into the bulkheads with broken arms and legs. The after 3 compartments flooded at once, and Tang went down by the stern, dropping to the bottom at 180 feet or roughly 55 meters. 9 men were on the bridge and in the conning tower area, O'Kane among them. As the stern fell away and the boat angled down, the bridge watch was swept into the sea before the hatch could be secured. Below, about 30 men survived the blast and crowded forward into the torpedo room, where the only escape trunk lay. They burned the boat's confidential papers and the forward spaces filled with smoke as the control room flooded behind them. Before they could begin their ascent, a Japanese patrol passed overhead and dropped depth charges, delaying the escape, while an electrical fire in the forward battery grew worse. Heat and smoke built in the compartment. At 6 a.m., they began going out the escape trunk, using the Mumson lung, a breathing bag pulled over their chest, the only successful escape of its kind made by Americans from a sunken submarine. They went up in small parties. 13 men got clear of the boat. By the time the last of them squeezed into the trunk, the battery fire was so hot that the paint on the bulkhead was melting and running down. Of the 13 who left, 5 reached the surface and lived. Others were too badly injured, exhausted, or trapped to make the climb. On the surface, the men swept from the bridge tried to stay together through the night, but only O'Kane, William Liebold, and Floyd Cavalier were still afloat by morning. They could see the bow of the transport Tang had attacked standing out in the sea. Lieutenant Larry Savatkin had escaped from the flooded conning tower and kept himself afloat by trapping air in his trousers. Around 10:30, a Japanese escort vessel picked up all 9 survivors, including O'Kane, and took them prisoner. Tang was gone. Of the 87 men aboard, 78 were lost and 9 survived, though some accounts count only 8. Post-war credit gave us 7 ships on the final patrol, close to 22,000 tons. Yoshugo and Oitamaru, 3 small freighters from the October 23rd convoy, and Kogenmaru and Matsumoto Maru from the final action. O'Kane disputed parts of that post-war accounting, arguing that Tang's lost records and uncertain Japanese identifications had left several ships uncredited. For the 9 men of Tang, captivity began on the deck of the escort that had picked them up. Among survivors of the ships they had sunk, scalded and burned men fell on them with blows and kicks. The Japanese classed them as special captives rather than prisoners of war. They held them in secret at the Ofuna interrogation camp and reported them to no one. Through the 10 months that followed, they were beaten, starved, and worn down by scurvy, with little to mark the days but the sound of American bombers passing overhead. At home, Tang had simply failed to return. She had reported nothing after leaving Midway, and the Navy gave her up for lost. In February 1945, she was struck from the register, with her entire crew counted among the dead. Not even the families of the 9 knew otherwise. When Japan surrendered in August 1945 and the camps were opened, O'Kane walked out, weighing less than 90 pounds. The 8 others survived as well, and the Navy learned for the first time how Tang had died. Clayton Decker, one of the men who had escaped through the forward torpedo room, came home to find that his wife had remarried. She had believed he went down with the boat. O'Kane received the Medal of Honor for the final patrol, and Tang was twice awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. In later years, after retiring as a Rear Admiral, he kept pressing to see Tang credited for every ship she had sunk. The later accounting bore him out, more enemy tonnage than any other American submarine in a combat career of 9 months, 4 complete patrols, and most of a 5th. Tang was never decommissioned. By the custom of the submarine service, she remains on eternal patrol. Thank you so much for watching this documentary on USS Tang. I hope you found it interesting. And I think one of the interesting things that I discovered as I was researching this and writing this and animating this is what spoke to me for some reason is that the ship that depth charged USS Tang, the Japanese ship CD-34, it actually wrote down USS Tang in Latin letters on its kill list. And obviously, this was only discovered after the war, after all this kind of became public knowledge, I suppose. It's just, well, it's interesting because Tang sank itself, and then this ship, it credited itself as well, so to say. At any rate, if you did find this documentary interesting, consider leaving a like, as it allows more people to discover House of History. And if there's a battle, a topic, or an event you would like to know more about, please do not hesitate to leave your thoughts in a comment. I try to read most of them. And it's always interesting to see what my viewers would like to see animated and what they enjoy. I also want to thank all my Patreons for their generous support. Over on Patreon, I post a free monthly newsletter. I post behind the scenes, upcoming topics, things that kind of pique my interest and things that I'm working on, things that are going on behind the scenes, you know, the animation process, the kind of, I guess, a look behind the curtain, if you will. So if you want to become part of the group that supports House of History, then consider joining me on Patreon. If not, then I'll hopefully see you here next week. Hope to see you over on Patreon. And yeah, if not, then next week over here. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you next time.